Madam President, I rise with a heavy heart today to speak on this motion that has been presented to us to borrow approximately EC $113 million from the Caribbean Development Bank. But, Madam President, what is most surprising about this motion today is not only the fact that we are coming to Parliament to borrow another $113 million approximately, but also the conditions that the Honorable Member, Leader of Government Business, took time out to articulate and to identify the conditions of the loan and also the purpose of the loan. So I want to take a moment perhaps to have a closer look at the conditions as articulated by the Honorable Member for accessing this loan. And I note that he made mention, he said, I think I wrote it somewhere, that when we came to Parliament in the past, perhaps the many times we came last year to bring in certain legislations, while we have the members opposite pontificating and beating their hands on their chest, telling the people how good they were at trying to, help them in terms of giving them waivers and tax breaks on interest and penalties. I'm sure you remember that, Madam President, how they were so happy and proud to say that they care about the businesses and the people, and they were giving them those tax breaks. We are finding out today that's not the case, Madam President. That's not the case. They were only doing that because they were forced by the Caribbean Development Bank as precondition for this loan that they had to borrow. So they went to Caribbean Development Bank, they had to borrow, and the bank said, but you must do this, you must do 1, 2, 3. I didn't say it, they did.
That's right.
That the bank said to them, you must do those things. And so they came to Parliament and said, we're doing this and we're doing that, but all the time. It was never out of the goodness of their heart. Never out of the goodness of their heart. Never because they cared about the people. They were forced by the Caribbean
Madam President, on a point of order.
What is your point of
Madam
order,
President,
Senator?
the member is misleading the House. If she would recall, during opposition, the SLP administration campaigned on offering tax breaks and tax relief to the people of St. Lucia. To come today and to state that we were forced to take that posture to allow for tax breaks to be able to facilitate this loan is misleading. And I will ask that the member, through you, retract that statement.
Thank you, Senator. I shall allow the member to proceed with her presentation, but I'm taking note.
Thank you, Madam President. If I use the word force, and it's probably a word that is too forceful, then maybe I can change the terminology and say that they did not have a choice, Madam President. They did not have a choice because the pre-requirements, that were the words of the Honorable Member, that there were preconditions that were set by the Caribbean Development Bank, and these were the conditions. And that is what he said. If I misquote him, he can correct me, but that is what he said. So, Madam President, let's take a look at the preconditions. And in his presentation, I note that both the Leader of Government Business and even the Honorable Prime Minister in the lower house, when he made his presentation, they were very clear that this was a policy-based loan. Very clear in that. It was a policy-based loan, and the money is to be used for two purposes: modernization of our tax administration and land administration service. First question, Madam President. I remember sometime last year, can't remember the month, let me see, September, I think, the month of September, members came to this Honorable House to borrow $200 million from the Saudi government. And they said that the money was for the stadium and for the hospital. No breakdown. How much is for the stadium? How much is for the hospital? No breakdown. Today we come to Parliament, the same thing. $113 million. Modernization of tax administration, land administration. No breakdown. Honorable member, I am hoping in your rebuttal you will say to us that X amount is for land administration services and X amount is for modernization of our tax administration. We are tired of coming to Parliament and we just pass things and we just say things and we don't allow the public to understand how we are using their money. We need the breakdown. But I will get back to that in a moment. Madam President, for me, listening to the honorable member and listening to the honorable Prime Minister last week, when he said that it was a policy-based loan, there were some prior commitments the government had to meet. Je voulais tout gens cette liste comprendre ça. Gouvernement dit yo kay point un loan from Caribbean Development Bank. Mais avant banque la ba yo l'argent, banque la dit yo la ni deux trois bagay yo ni pour faire avant yo ba yo l'argent. Et ces bagay la yo ni pour faire avant yo ba yo l'argent. L'année passée, gouvernement vient au Parlement et que passé combien fonds en loi, yo passé combien fonds en bail en Parlement. Toutes les ayoka dit c'est mon nous fait ça puisque nous comptons nous kachile à tout nous voulons make sure tout bail ka passer bien puis mais ça nous pas te savent madame président c'est raison yo de ka passer ces législations ça c'est parce que banque là dit yo ni pour faire ces bagailles ça là avant yo joindre l'argent. So I want the St. Lucian public to understand the process that the government must go through before coming to Parliament to seek permission to borrow money. The process starts with the estimates of revenue and expenditure, and I think that the government is currently going through that process of preparing for the estimates of revenue and expenditure. Then the government will start with the estimates, government will determine what the estimated revenue is or will be and what the estimated expenditure will be. And in the case of St. Lucia, I think I'm very young, but I can't recall a time when the revenue was greater than the expenditure. There may have been, but I don't know. But, this one coming, I wait to see it. But I can't recall a time, so it hasn't happened. That is in the future. Miracles do happen. Let's see what happens. But I can't recall a time. And so we've always been left with a deficit. A miracle working government? I give you that. Okay. So, Madam President, if you're bringing in $100, you have a business, you're bringing in $100, but you're spending, when you estimate your expenditures, you estimate that you will have to spend $150, it means that you will have a shortfall of $50. So you have to decide, where can I get that $50 to ensure that I can cover my expenditure? That is what the government is doing. So in order to balance the budget, the government has to identify potential sources of funds that they can borrow from. And in most instances, they have to list it first in the budget, in the estimates. So if you go through the estimates, you will see the financial institutions, potential financial institutions that they would have gone to try and borrow money from. So it's there. So in last year's budget, we had a deficit. I heard that a miracle is going to happen this time, so we're not going to have a deficit. I will wait for that. And the government listed the sources of funds, and one of them was the CDB. So it means that from last year, when the government was preparing their estimates of revenue and expenditure, the Prime Minister of this country, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, knew that he would have to borrow approximately $113 million or more from the CDB. He knew that very well. Now the Prime Minister went on to explain, and the member as well, that in order to qualify for the loan, there were certain conditions or requirements that the government needed to access the money. He said that part of the conditions they had to do some prior actions, and I want you to remember that word, Madam President. Prior actions. The initiatives were not pie in the sky. One of the prior actions is to enhance tax revenue and support fiscal stability. Show, Madam President. Mouth open, story jump out. Madam President, can you imagine that in order to enhance our tax revenue and support our fiscal stability, now remember, you're already operating at a deficit, so you know for sure that you would need that extra money, and the bank says, well, you need to show me how you're going to, have some extra income and so forth. And so it was agreed that, and that's what the word of the Prime Minister and the member, that they had to implement a 2.5% levy. Now, I remember, Madam President, I was part of the debate last year when we spoke about that 2.5% revenue. And I was very clear and I was very adamant to this House that this was a hoax. That money was never for health and security. Why? Because I went through this estimated preparation and I could not find new initiatives. I could not identify what were the initiatives for health and security. As a matter of fact, when we looked at it, I think it was health. Yes, health. The budgetary allocation for health went down by $9 million. It didn't increase. It went down by $9 million. So, I could not understand how is it you collecting and you put in a new tax for health and security, and instead of increasing the budgetary allocation for health, you reduce it. That made no sense, Madam President. And now today we are finding out that what I said was right. I also want the public to understand that the government had a choice, in enhancing your fiscal revenue. You had a choice. You did not have to implement the tax. And I made those recommendations as well. You could cut down your irrelevant expenditure if you want to enhance your tax revenue. Can you not do that? And I mentioned quite a few of them, but I'll remind the public that when you increase your consultancy vote by 44 million, not 244, you increase consultancy by $44 million. That was added to your already consultancy. Why could you not cut that in order to enhance your revenue? Irrelevant expenditure. And that could have gone a long way. But they chose not to do it, Madam President. They chose to implement a 2.5% levy. I think that last week, the entire nation shook when they heard the pronouncement by the Prime Minister. I could not believe my ears. Shock. Betrayal.
That's correct.
Lies. Truth. Gouvernement du Vadé. All these were the thoughts going through my mind because I could not understand how in July of last year we came to this very same parliament and we debated an additional tax, a tax that everyone told the government was a bad move. The Chamber of Commerce spoke against it. The Accountants Association spoke against it. The business people spoke against it. Everyone told the government that this was not the time to implement such a tax. And we couldn't understand why the Prime Minister was not listening to what everybody was telling him. But today, we understand why. We know today. Madam President, you know what is called absolution? My Catholic friend used the Lenten season a while ago. Well, we're in the Lenten season. I will tell you. You see, this government, you only put absolution. This whole Lenten season, my recommendation is that you have to go and fast and pray this entire Lenten season for forgiveness from the public of St. Lucia. And I'm not even sure if that will help you. But there's a song that says, my grandmother used to sing that song, She sang a lot of choruses of songs when I was little. I didn't realize it was song. There's a song that says, Teacher Percy say if you tell a lie, you go into hell. As soon as you die, well, you hear lie? That is lie, Madam President. How could an entire cabinet of ministers, and even my colleagues over here, come to this honorable house, this parliament, and blatantly mislead the public of St. Lucia, unless they didn't know. So I don't know.
Senator,
but to mislead the public.
Senator, just to correct you, this is the Senate. This is not the House of Parliament.
Oh,
this
the
is
Senate.
the Senate.
The Honorable Senate? Okay, the Honorable Senate, and try to mislead the public of St. Lucia to tell them that the tax was for health and security. But today, we are learning it is a requirement set by the CDB so that the government can take a loan.
Madam President, on a point of order.
Senator Shaw, what is your point of order?
Madam President, the senator is misleading the House. From my understanding of what the leader of government business presented, the health and security levy, though a requirement of the policy-based loan, is for health and security. So to present it as if it was otherwise is misleading. It is to say, she's trying to imply that it was a requirement of the policy-based loan, but not directed at health and security. This is misleading, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention, Senator Shaw. Please proceed, and please be guided accordingly, Senator Charles.
Madam President, if the honorable member can show us perhaps the funding for the health and security, I stand corrected, if it is directed towards health and security, if the honorable member, because this is what I was getting to, the chamber, Mr. Luisi of the chamber at the time, he made a statement. Sorry. He made a statement.
Healthcare costs went down significantly. You didn't budget.
He made a statement and he suggested that if the tax is for, and I'm not quoting him verbatim, but just summarizing what he said, that if the tax was for health and security, they would have been more comfortable if the money was allocated directly to health and security and not into the consolidated funds. So if the honorable member wants to say that I am misleading and that it is for health and security, if they can show during their presentation where the money is allocated directly to health and security, I stand corrected.
But Senator, I think we can argue that point till we blue in the face.
Yes.
You have your point, and Senator Shaw has a point. I think we should just move on, despite the fact, because there seems to be a disagreement as to what was said, what is implied, so just move on.
Yes, Madam President. Madam President, thank you. Madam President, I think that some people should be ashamed to look at the St. Lucian public in the eye. Because it's one of two things. Is either they all knew and they were all duped, and if they knew, Madam President, today is the day to make things right. We don't want to hear the usual, when you all was there, oh, your government this, Alan Chasney, Alan Chasney, Alan Chasney. If anybody here has any virtue, and you should all stand one by one and apologize to the public of St. Lucia. Tell them I'm sorry.
Senator. Please choose your words carefully. I do not appreciate you saying if any senators have any virtue. Be careful with your language in this honorable space. You may proceed.
I can take that back, Madam President.
Please take that back, and I think, yes.
I take it back? Yes. Then they should apologize to the public of St. Lucia, Madam President.
I don't think you have taken it back.
Oh, yes,
You should retract that.
I would like to retract the statement that I made about if anybody here has any virtue. Yes. Thank you. So, they need to tell the public of St. Lucia if they knew that the tax was to enhance revenue collection and it was not because we needed to enhance health and security. They need to say, I am sorry to the people of St. Lucia. Anything less is unacceptable. Or, Madam President, equally, they can all stand up and say, I did not know, and I only found out this week when the Prime Minister made his presentation. I don't know which one is going to be. But they always like to say, the youth are watching us. We need to set the example. Well, set the example today. Do not be cowards like your colleagues in the lower house. Madam President, are you aware that not one elected member of parliament stood up and supported the motion in the lower house? Not one. Not one. You didn't follow? Not one. And you know what that tells me, Madam President? They all knew, because it would have had to be discussed in cabinet. So they all knew from last year, when the discussions were taking place with reference to financing and where we'll get the money, we need to do this, we need to do that. I think I listed all what the honorable member said. We need to, they increased the excise tax on tobacco products. They had to unify and enhance legislation relating to public debt. They had to bring in legislation on public procurement, public finance regulation, all the work. So they knew, because all these legislations would have had to be drafted and then go through cabinet. So cabinet members knew. So that's why not one of them stood up. Not one of them stood up for St. Lucia and for St. Lucians. So today, I hope all of them will speak, Madam President. I hope all of them will speak. The shoe is on the other foot now. Let the young people and the people of St. Lucia see how you will act. Will you stand up today for the people of this country? Madam President, are you aware that so far, as indicated by the Honorable Prime Minister, that from last year, October, that we have collected $10.5 million, approximately, he said, $10.5 million on the health and security levy, and today nobody knows where or how that money has been used. Nobody, no accountability. All the funds has gone straight to the consolidated funds, the pool of the consolidated funds, and whoosh, it has disappeared just like everything that comes into the consolidated funds. And then they like to talk about debt, Madam President. About borrowing and debt. Let me give you some figures, Madam President, about that. Because we're borrowing 100 in total, approximately, all three. We're borrowing about $152 million today from all the motions that we have. And the members like to talk about the numbers don't lie. I agree, Madam President. The numbers don't lie. So they can turn to the Social and Economic Review 2022. Let's look at the numbers, what the numbers say about debt.
What page?
Page 115. You know, the St. Lucia Labour Party government likes to accuse the previous administration of Madipwete. And I'll tell you, ukwe Madipwete gone, Madipwete just commencé. Madipwete just commencé. So let's look at the numbers, because this is where I got my numbers from, Madam President. So if I am quoting anything wrong, then I'm quoting from the Social and Economic Review. Let's look at the numbers and the amount of monies that were borrowed by the previous administration vis-a-vis the amount of money that has been borrowed, including today, by this current administration. In 2016, $69.9 million. And remember, the UWP government came in June of 2016. So halfway through the year, about halfway through the year. In 2017, they borrowed $105.9 million. In 2018, they borrowed $129 million. And in 2019, they borrowed $111.3 million. Now, I'm just going to stick a pin at 2019, and let's look at their first 3 full years, because I'll still get to 2020 when COVID hit. 2017, Madam President, I forget about 2016. We came in halfway through the year, we leave it out. 2017, 2018, and 2019. Do you know how much money in total the government had borrowed then? $346.2 million. 3 years. Let's look at the 3 years of this administration, Madam President. They came in 2021. I'm not even putting that yet. I'm not going to that number yet. 2022, they borrowed $259.7 million. One go, 1 year. 2023, they borrowed $318.6 million. One go. And to date,
Madam President,
in 2024.
Madam President, the member has...
On a point of order?
Yeah, she's
What is your point of order,
She's
Senator
quoting from page 115 of the Social and Economic Review. I cannot see what she's saying there.
I'll make a copy for you.
No, I have it. If you quote the page properly and you quote the...
115 speaks to
What?
public sector outstanding liabilities, outlets.
Yeah, what section are you reading from?
I'm reading the official public debt. Yes.
And what you quoting, where are you quoting, madam?
I am quoting the official public debt, so you can get for 20.
Yeah, the figures that you're reading are different to what I have here.
We just have to do the deduction. So 2015 from 20.
Yeah, but if you quote in, Madam President, you quote what is there. You don't make deductions and do all things, Madam President. This is misleading. She's supposed to, if you're quoting, you're supposed to be presenting what is in the document. But based on what is there, if you're analyzing, you say you're analyzing, Madam President. But if you're quoting, then you're supposed to present what is right there in the document. And that is what is misleading. And you need to, Madam President, I believe my colleague needs to present the facts. If she's analyzing, say that I have analyzed and that's what I deduced from it. But if she's quoting, then it should be right there. Because I am right here, and the people of St. Lucia who do not have the benefit of the Social and Economic Review are going to be even more confused.
Thank you, Senator Jean. Senator Charles, I wish to guide you accordingly. I take the point from Senator Shah that if you are quoting a direct information, you ought to quote it what is there. And if you are making any analysis, that you should say so. But if you're quoting a direct thing, you should say on page number, that section, it reads X, Y, and Z, and I quote. Okay, so let us be guided by this. Okay.
My apologies, Madam President. So what I have done, Madam President, is taken the public debt numbers on page 115 of the Economic and Social Review, and I have done an analysis, if you want to call it that, in terms of comparing what the debt amount would have been for each year. And it's a very simple. If last year was 100 and this year it's 200, 100 from last year and 100 this year you deduct, so you know this is how much it has grown. So it's a simple analysis, but that's okay. It's just to use the number to deduct one for, so it's an analysis and not a direct quote, Madam
Yes,
President.
but I think the concern was how you are putting it forward. Okay, it could be misleading. If you're quoting directly, you say so, and if you're not, you said I made the calculation and this is what I came up with. Okay.
Yes, Madam President. So I made the calculation, Madam President, and this is what I came up with when I calculated the numbers as stated in the Economic and Social Review. So when you did the deduction, you would recognize 2022, you would have had $259.7 million. And for 2023, Madam President, the numbers for 2023, I used the numbers from Parliament based on, I had a one in accounts and I'm an account student, just so you know, sir. And maths as well. So the numbers for 2023 would be based on what we have borrowed, because the Economic and Social Review is not out as yet, so the numbers would be taken from all the borrowings we've had in Parliament so far, and it totaled to $318.6 million. And for 2024, which would be today, Madam President, we're borrowing approximately 152. Do you know what the tally for 22, 23, and 24 will be, Madam President? The number would be $730 million. Wow. So who has borrowed more? Who has borrowed more? Now, remember I said 2017, 2018, and 2019. The figures were $346.2 million. COVID hit us in 2020, and that's when we borrowed the most amount, because you would recognize in 2016 we borrowed 69 million. 2017, 105. 2018, 129. So we were very reserved in our borrowing. 2019, 111. But when COVID hit, we borrowed $356 million. And they blew the roof, Madam President.
And that's in what year?
Sorry? 2020. 2020. They blew the roof.
Everybody else in the
We borrowed money, we borrowing money, and up to today they're quoting the debt to GDP, etc., Madam President. But when I did a tally to say, okay, 2017, 2018, 2019, and even 2020, the COVID year, when you tally all the monies that the UWP administration borrowed, it amounted to $702 million. And in 3 years, this government would have borrowed $730 million. So you borrowed almost $30 million more than the previous government in 3 years than we did in 5 years. And you want to talk about Madipwete, Madam President? You want to talk about Pani Madipwete? Who's doing the Madipwete and the Lady Pwete and the Mekwedipwete now? Who? I want the St. Lucian public to understand that every time the members opposite stand up and they want to talk about, oh sorry.
You have 15 minutes to complete your presentation.
Should be finished. I want the members of St. Lucia to understand that every time the members of the St. Lucia Labour Party stand up to talk about that, throw it in their face.
The members,
remind them.
on the point of correction, they are not members of the Labour Party. They are senators.
I'm not talking about them.
Pardon?
I'm not talking about them.
Well, we are speaking of what's happening here.
Okay. Well, I want the St. Lucian public to understand that the senators opposite me, that every time they attempt to speak about debt, remind them, St. Lucia, that they borrowed 730 so far, and we only borrowed 702 in 5 years, and in 3 years they were at 730. God forbid what is going to happen this fiscal year and next. We'll do the tally, but I'll remind them, Madam President. I'll remind them. But Madam President, I wanted to ask, we're borrowing this money today. Have you heard of any new initiatives in healthcare? As a matter of fact, access to healthcare in this country has gotten worse, Madam President. You buy a nom ki fin kwaze fig like, but agriculture, fin fig, you buy healthcare. He can fin healthcare by so. He could not manage banana. You think his healthcare he will be able to manage? Ask the people who visit the hospital how many hours they have to wait in emergency. Emergency, you know, no medicines in the pharmacy. A lady called just this week on talk show to speak about her 90-something-year-old grandmother who was admitted, I'm not sure, at the St. Jude Hospital. And she said when she was discharged, they gave her a bill. So she asked them about the 80-year-plus program and said, my grandmother is 93 or 94. And asked about the 80-year-plus program and why. The people, that's what she said. Mavledi, Society, it's all over the media. She said that the people said they have no idea about this. They have not been given any directives. And she had to pay over $900 for a 3-day stay at the hospital. But they're busy advertising universal health care for pregnant women and 80-plus program. Take the money you're giving to all the media houses as reward for supporting you all to buy medication for the poor and elderly. Instead of spending money on ceremonies to launch a jingle and a campaign, take the money and buy bed sheets and toilet paper to put in the hospitals. It's a shame, Madam President, that today we are borrowing over $100 million and we have patients who are covered with shower curtains in the Isle of an hospital. Shower curtains, they don't have bed sheet. If this government was serious about health and security, should not the money we borrowing today go towards buying medication and equipment and hiring more doctors and nurses at the hospital? If you all was serious about healthcare, you telling me you come in and borrow money for land administration and tax administration, and people are dying in this country? But after you came to the people and you were not truthful to them about the tax, today you are borrowing money on the head of a tax that is not even for the benefit of the people. If you needed money so much for land administration, you had a piece of land that could have been sold for almost $50 million in Bannan. Why did you not sell it at the market value and use that money for land administration? Go and pay for the land with it. So you give away the land to your friends, and today you come in here to borrow money on the backs of St. Lucia to pay back for land again? Shame on y'all. Look at the state of our roads, Madam President. Every day people are on the media. Bus drivers going on strike. Taxi drivers are ashamed to drive our visitors around. Road users suffer from busted tires, broken rims, broken underarms, and we're borrowing over $100 million today. And not 1 cent of that money is going to fix the roads. Not 1 cent. Madam President, I listed from last year the borrowings that we came to Parliament. In March, we borrowed 3.5 million EC for St. Jude's, we say. On March 7th, on March 14th, we borrowed $26 million from CDB. We said it was for COVID. In May, y'all borrowed that in March, you know. May, we borrowed 32. That's what happened last year, Madam President, 2023. In May, $32.1 million we said for budgetary support. In September, $200 million to rebuild an 80-year-old structure at St. Jude's. In October, $26.9 million for the St. Lucia Fire Service. In November, $16.2 million from the African Import Bank. I'm not sure what that one was for. And then we borrowed $3.2 million for Tropical Storm Brett for the school, etc., etc. In December, we borrowed $10 million for water supply. Where's our priority, Madam President? Where's the money for the police? Where's the money for security? Where's the money for healthcare that we're borrowing in this country? Every day, and you want to talk about priority? That's your priority? And they say this year is the year of infrastructure, Madam President. So, toute machine moun ni pourquoi c'est cette lisi avant de faire bail. Fire the lazy roller. Move him in the cabinet. Il pas faire rien.
Senator, Senator Charles, I would ask that you retract that name-calling statement that you made. There will be none of that in this house. And if you make consist, I may have to ask you to take your seat. You don't do this in this honorable house. Would you kindly retract that statement?
Madam President, I would like to retract the statement where I said to fire the lazy roller.
And I think you should apologize for name-calling in this house. We don't do this.
My apologies, Madam.
And please conduct yourself as an honorable senator. I don't have to give you that lecture. I don't.
Okay.
Let's have some order in this house. I am speaking.
Okay.
Senators, I am speaking. And this is my final warning to Senator Charles. It happens again, I will ask you to respectfully take your seat.
Thank you, Madam President. Much appreciated. Madam President, so Madam President, I cannot support this motion today to borrow this money. If the main reason for the tax was to borrow the money and use the money for health and security purposes, and it was to finance many initiatives of the police, the Ministry of Equity, a lot of the proposals that they have put to help with crime in this country, I would have stand up here proudly and boldly and supported that motion. But Madam President, I cannot support that motion. And I'm asking the government to put some money for a change into the programs that matter. We have a lot of young men dying. And these single mothers, we have a lot of single mothers who are having difficulties with their young sons. We have teachers who are feeling a bit unsafe in the classroom. and we should be borrowing $100 million. We should not be borrowing $100 million for tax administration and land administration. Where is our priority, Madam President? So, Madam President, like I said, in conclusion, I call on my colleagues to take this opportunity given to speak honestly to the people of this country. I urge the leader of government business to do the right thing. He's a young man, and I think that a lot of young people look up to him. And I hope today he will look at the script that has been given to him, but he will come clean with the people of St. Lucia. It's not too late, honorable member. Either you will have to apologize to the people of St. Lucia for misleading them with reference to the tax, or you tell them that you did not know that the tax was a precursor to this loan. Either way, you have to tell them something.
Senator, you speak to the chair.
Sorry, Madam President. Either way, Madam President, something will have to be said to the people. And if that's not what you're going to say to the people, I don't think the people want to hear anything from you. Thank you very much, Madam President.